Thank you for tuning in to Night Drive Paranormal. It's been a while, I know, but I'm back with 4 brand new real-life encounters with the strange and the unexplained to share with you all. From strange lights in the night to paranormal encounters, and maybe even a doppelganger. I'm sure you'll find something in tonight's selection to chill you as you drive home on this long, dark stretch of road. Don't forget, all of these stories are told in the words of the people who claim to have experienced them. Whatever you choose to believe, they say that these events really happened to them. Debate and conversation is very welcome in the comments, but please try and keep it respectful. With that out of the way, the midnight hour is here, so let's get into the first story. Get comfortable. It's time to take another night drive. I haven't really talked about what happened to me in years. The people closest to me have heard my story at some point or another, but it's debatable on whether any of them believe me. I don't blame them. If I didn't know better, I wouldn't believe it myself. I was 11, going on 12 years old. This multiple episode experience occurred between 1995 to 1996. I grew up in Washington State in a small rural logging town, built and settled in the 1800s. My town was nestled in a valley not far from the icy waters of the Pacific coast, population 8,756. At the time, I was living outside the city limits. My childhood home sits on a horse acre, densely circled by ancient trees and well-worn forest trails. One night I awoke to this blinding light engulfing my room and my window. I was groggy, out of it, but I was awake and very confused. The light was so bright I had to squint my eyes, and I heard unsettling and strange sounds. I thought maybe my neighbours were having an annoying loud party. I tried to go back to sleep, tossed and turned trying to ignore the intrusive noise. But things only got weirder. As I laid there, disgruntled and tired, I heard what I likened to footsteps echoing, as if someone or something were running up and down the empty street outside my window. But the street was not right outside my window, yet the footsteps echoed so clearly, the cadence of them rising and falling. It was as if whoever was out there kept coming closer, only to turn around and run away again. Coupled with the footsteps was the noise I thought was a party. It sounded like voices, but they weren't speaking words. It was more like a wave of sound that would go from extremely loud to eerily low. It would become almost inaudible, and then start building up again into an anxiety-inducing crescendo. Even more creepy, it was now distinctly what I identified as laughing and crying. The sound would get loud, laughing, 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 and then start to dip down low, low, lower, into a desperate crying. Then it would start to get loud again and back and forth. At first I was so hazy from sleep that I thought exactly what I said above, that the neighbours were having a party. As I became more aware, I realised with a horrible feeling that it was 4:45 in the morning, and my neighbours were in no way having a party this loud, nor would I be able to hear them as clearly as I could hear this sound. And the sound was so strange. It was not the sound of a party. It made my hair stand on end. I also struggled to reason that the bright light was a street light. But again, as I became more aware, I also knew this was false. Like I said, I lived in the woods, and there were no streetlights close enough or bright enough to shine into my window, let alone feel the whole pain. Then, just when fear had begun to take hold, a sudden numbness washed over me. It wasn't calm, but more like utter indifference. I remember getting out of bed. I can still see myself swinging my legs off the edge of the mattress as I stand and face the closet mirrors. Essentially, it was a long row of mirrors that covered the closet doors lining my wall, so I was able to see my reflection very clearly. The lights were shining in on me from the window to my left. I was wearing this pink nightgown that was always too hot no matter what time of year it was. I still think back on this and wonder why I chose to wear it that night. Afterwards, every time I put that nightgown on, I hated it and would rip it right back off. As I stood there, held fast by my own reflection, the light dimmed to a strange orange glow as it seemed to scan over me, and I remember feeling like I was moving in slow motion, as if it were a dream. I can still see my face staring blankly into the mirror with no expression, as if in a trance. The next thing I remember was being back in bed, and the light was still at my window. This is where something happened that really sticks out to me, and it's the part of my experience that I can never seem to explain clearly. My memories of it are very choppy, as if something scrambled my thoughts or understanding of what happened. I saw what looked like heads. I don't know how else to describe it. All I know is that I knew there were people, or something like people, standing outside my window. My bedroom window looks out onto the second floor of our house, so there was no way people were standing out there, unless they were on my roof. And all I could remember was just thinking, bald heads. Bald heads were moving underneath my windowsill. Again, this makes no sense, but nothing about this particular night does. The heads were moving in a very strange pattern, like one after the other, following each other across my roof. There was a fluidity to the movement, the figures flashing in and out, light then dark, then over again. It was almost as if they were silhouetted against the bright backdrop of the light. When I found myself once again back in bed, I became truly scared. And I was aware that I was scared for a very good reason. Something didn't make sense. In my weird trance-like state, I simply rolled over to face the wall, pulled the covers over my head and went to sleep. This time, it worked. When I woke up the next morning, I told my mum exactly what happened, and she got a very strange look on her face, and then quietly said, "If anything like that ever happens again, make an X on a piece of paper when it's happening, so you know you're not dreaming." I could hear the seriousness in her voice. It made me feel odd, as if something big had happened to me, but my understanding of it was all muddled. My mum then proceeded to tell me her experience. When she was just a little girl, barely a toddler, she was living on a US naval base in the Philippines, sometime between the years of 1952 to 1954. One night, in fragmented memories, she remembers crawling out of her crib, out from under the mosquito net, and into the living room of her house. She saw a bright light appear outside the large bay windows, and it terrified her. There was a sound, an owl, and it kept hooting and hooting. Just like I had experienced, the sound was overwhelming in volume. She remembers nothing after that. In the morning, she woke up on the living room carpet, in front of the windows. Over the years since this incident, I've tried to explain away my experience in a variety of ways. Sleep paralysis, hypnagogic hallucinations, false memory, a nightmare. I've attempted to convince myself of these things many times over, but it's really just an exercise in futility. The truth is, I'd seen that light before. I hadn't seen it up close, not like I did that night. But now, I'm sure I saw the craft it came from, and I saw it multiple times. As a kid, I documented it in my journal. The first time I ever saw a strange blue orb of light shoot across the sky outside my window, I remember feeling at first amazed, then skeptical, then a little scared. My journal entry at the time was light-hearted, so I know it had to be one of the first experiences I'd had, or that I could remember. The second experience was different, one that I buried deep for many years. It was either January or July, New Year's or the 4th. I want to say July because we were outside and it's Washington State. Nobody goes outside in January. My friends and I were playing in the woods surrounding my house, hide and seek tag in the dark. We were chasing each other all over my yard, each trying to find the best hiding spot before the other person could. It was in the midst of this ruckus that, out of nowhere, we all saw something strange hanging over the horizon in the clear night sky. At first, it looked like a star, as it was up high and appeared very far away, but there was something about it, something that seemed to demand our undivided attention. Slowly, we had each left our respective hiding spots. Almost inadvertently, we had come to stand together as a group. Then we watched in stunned silence as the star began to move. What happened next has never left me. This star, or what we thought was the star, suddenly just dropped. It literally fell hundreds of feet with an incredible and uncanny speed. This seemed to happen in the blink of an eye. None of us moved or said a word, as the object then began to dance and hover in the sky, while the three of us watched in utter shock. It was moving in the strangest way, not erratically but almost squiggly, performing this up and down vertical shimmy in the sky. We were transfixed by it, and time seemed to stand still in that moment. In my mind's eye, I can't clearly recall anything else, but the sight of that light in the sky, it overtakes everything else. The way it moved, a dazzling orb against the inky blue of the night. Even the memory of it is eerily hypnotic. I've been thinking about it all day and into the wee hours of the night now. All I see is that light, and we were just kids. Before we could even grasp what we were seeing or comprehend its implications, this thing shot up and over the western horizon, with a speed unlike anything I'd ever witnessed. It was just gone. Being either very brave or very dumb little kids, we stubbornly stayed outside, running around deliriously in the dark, searching in the sky for the star. At once we all saw what we likened to multiple military aircraft, racing in the direction that the light went. They flew overhead as a collective, with a very distinct purpose. We watched in awe as the aircraft sped due west, following the same course of the light. It was such a surreal experience that for years I didn't believe I even really saw such a thing. That is until one day, not even 2 months ago, I reconnected with my 2 friends who were with me that night. They're brothers, one younger than me and one older. They're like family but more distant now, after so much life has happened. It's been 28 years since that night. Still, talking to them now felt like we'd never parted. No matter how far away we are now, or how many years have gone by, I did my best to edge around the small talk, so anxious to ask them only one but very simple question. Do you remember that night we saw the star? Both had begun to chatter excitedly when I asked them this. I spoke to them separately and over the phone, but once I hung up with the first brother, the other was already texting me, asking me to call. While I was on the phone with him, his younger brother was messaging both of us, almost frantically, as if he had been waiting to talk about this since we were kids. I knew the feeling because I've been waiting too, and didn't even know it until that moment. Why it took us so long to discuss it, I'll never know. As we talked, we all came to agree on one thing. This really happened. Our memories of the main event were almost identical, but for some reason, it's the time and date that none of us can seem to remember. It's as if the experience is just there, stuck inside our heads, but we have no recollection of its exact happenstance. I don't know, it's weird talking about it. People think you're crazy when you say things like this. It is what it is though. It happened. And now I have unexpected nightmares. Flashbacks that take me to a place of blind panic and despair. Whatever I experienced that night, the night that something came to my window, it must have been beyond anything I was capable of comprehending. The fear that comes with the dreams is indescribable. It's animalistic. There are no appropriate words I can think of to convey the feeling of pure raw terror that overtakes me. My whole body begins to vibrate. I feel myself being pulled up and away, and I wake up screaming in the dark. I still see that light in my dreams, and I still see it coming for me. They are coming for me. I knew it then and I still feel it now, all these years later. We are not alone. We never have been. Thank you to Jessica for that one. Don't forget, if you enjoy this episode, please do click subscribe so you don't miss out on any future releases. We're heading off to Brazil next for a brief encounter with one of the most widely reported paranormal phenomenons, the shadow people. My name is Natan. I am Brazilian and I experienced something I never fully understood. I am asking for everyone's help to figure out what happened. When I was 16 years old, I spent a holiday at my aunt's farm in the countryside of Sao Paulo state. It was a Saturday and we were all happy. We had spent a great day with a typical Brazilian barbecue, swimming in the pool, and planned to watch the original 1990s version of the movie It in the evening. There were 4 of us: me, my cousin, his girlfriend, and my other cousin. At the beginning of the movie, everything seemed normal. It was a bit creepy, but nothing extraordinary. However, when the movie was halfway through, something strange happened. The door to the room we were in opened, and we all looked, expecting it to be one of my uncles or my parents asking us to turn down the TV volume. But it wasn't. Something dark was watching us. The door was 40% open, and it seemed like a shadow was peeking through it. My cousin's girlfriend asked who it was, as in the dark. It could have been any of the people I mentioned, but we got no response. And then the door slammed shut. We were all startled and stood paralysed, not understanding what had happened. After a few minutes, we decided to go out and check the rooms in the house, asking if anyone had opened the door, but everyone denied it. The 4 of us went back to the room and started talking about what had happened. We all agreed that something had opened the door, which was closed, and after watching us for a while, it slammed shut. We all saw the shadow watching us. It was just something dark, without eyes or a mouth, but with a presence that showed it was still observing us. We turned off the movie and tried to sleep, though it was difficult due to the shock. The fact the house was surrounded by nature, nocturnal animal sounds, also didn't help us. It might not be the best horror story, but I can guarantee it's 100% real. So help me out. What do you think that shadow was? Do you have a story you want to share? Then please send it to the tape library at pm.me. I try to read most stories I get sent, but it does take a long time for me to get to each one, so please don't worry if you don't hear back from me. Let's get into our next story tonight. This is a retelling of my experience some 10 years ago now. Now, for some context, we had immigrated to another country a fair few years prior to this incident, and we were visiting back staying in our former house. This former house of ours was built brand new, on a plot of land that my mother had inherited. Despite the house being built brand new for our family, however, over the years there have been multiple incidents experienced by various members of the family and occupants of the house that didn't immediately have a logical explanation, leading us to suspect that something terrible may have happened on this particular plot of land some time before, potentially during the Second World War, when our city was under Japanese occupation, to cause these sorts of occurrences. But that's all speculation. This particular incident happened during one afternoon on the second floor of the house. I was getting ready in the bathroom to go out for a night in the town, with a few of my cousins which I was close to. We were in our late teens and early 20s at the time. I was just using the vanity mirror and sink, and so had the bathroom door located not half a foot away to my right, completely open. One of my cousins, who was also able to come with me, was also getting ready at the same time, also only using the vanity mirror and sink, and as he was taller than me, stood behind me to allow the both of us to use the mirror at the same time. In the background I could hear the TV set downstairs, and knowing that my younger sister and mother were there, didn't think too much of it. A couple of minutes later, I saw towards the side of my vision, my younger sister walk past the bathroom door and enter the master bedroom, whose door was immediately perpendicular to the door to the bathroom. I remember seeing out of the corner of my eye her long flowing dark brown hair as she walked past, and heard the creaking of the bedroom door as it opened and closed. At the time I paid her no mind, as I had thought that perhaps my sister was just looking to grab the novel she was reading at the time from her luggage that was temporarily stored in the master bedroom. So I continued getting ready and looking forward to the fun evening ahead. A couple more minutes later, I was getting ready to get changed into some nicer clothes to go out in, when I realised the outfit I was hoping to wear was actually still downstairs, after only recently being washed. Hearing the TV set still on downstairs, thinking that my mum was still watching TV, and only being half decently clothed, I called out to my mum hoping to ask for a favour. "Mum," I called out from the top of the stairs, "would you mind grabbing my outfit?" No reply. "Mum?" I called out again. Again, no reply. I thought that perhaps the TV was just too loud and she couldn't hear me over the top of it, so I called out again, this time slightly louder. "Mum?" This time, however, to my complete surprise, a reply came. "Mum isn't here, she's out and about." It was my sister replying back to me from downstairs. Utterly confused as to how she could be downstairs when I saw her walk past me while I was in the bathroom only a couple of minutes ago, I asked, "Were you not just up here a couple of minutes ago?" "No," she replied. "Didn't you come up here to grab a book or something?" I asked again from the top of the stairs. "Nope," again was her reply. "But I saw you walk past me to go into Mum and Dad's bedroom. I haven't been upstairs ever since coming back into the house this afternoon," came her response. Sensing the annoyance and irritation in her tone at my repeated questions and insistence, I decided to drop the topic. With my eyebrows furrowed, I walked a couple of steps back from the landing at the top of the stairs, back into the bathroom. I was still confused as to what I might have seen, whether or not I had just imagined things or had just been mistaken, when I looked up to meet my cousin's same look of confusion, and with his head slightly tilted to the side, he said to me, "But I even heard her open the bedroom door after she walked past us." My eyes widened. "So you saw her too?" I exclaimed. At that moment, my cousin and I decided to go into the master bedroom to see who might have entered. We found the room empty after walking in to check, and my cousin and I were left scratching our heads as we walked back out, feeling even more confused after finding no one there. Up until this day, we still couldn't figure out who, what, and or how we saw what we saw on that afternoon. This is only one of the few notable unexplained occurrences in our former house. I chose to share this one as it's by far the most puzzling, with two people seeing the same thing at the same time. It occurred during the day with plenty of daylight, and no darkness to hide things or play tricks on our eyes. Since then we have just labelled that particular instance as my sister's doppelganger. Still makes me scratch my head each time I think back to it. Okay, only 4 stories tonight, but that's because this last one is a bit of an epic. So relax a little bit longer while we get into the paranormal life of Michelle. I'm not much of a writer, and there are things now that make sense in hindsight that didn't at the time. I can't really explain any of it, so I'll leave it to you to decide if any of this fits your stories. I haven't thought about this part of my life for nearly 15 years, but listening to your channel made me feel the need to write it all down. The only people who know what happened to me when I was younger are my family and my husband. As for the other incidents, apart from those involving other people, I have spoken to some others to get perspective, but they've always leaned towards paranormal explanations. Just a bit of background. My father was in the army, so my family moved around a lot. By the time my mother was pregnant with me, we lived in the UK. When I was 6 weeks old, we moved to Germany, my mother's homeland, for 2 years. Then we came back to the UK and settled in a small, old coal mining village in Northumberland called Acomb. I would have been just over 2 years old, around late 1987 or early 1988. Although I can't remember any of it, when we were in Germany I spent time with my mother's family, since both my parents worked. By the time I was 1, different family members told my mother that I would look at, react to, and smile at things that apparently weren't there. Years later, I was told that my maternal grandmother had a sort of sixth sense, but I've never met her, as she died before I was born. Here's a side note about the first home we had in the UK. When I was in my early 20s, my mother and sister and I were going through some of my mother's old paperwork. We came across lots of old photos and started looking at them. I saw a picture of my older brother and sister playing with trucks in the garden, with the house in the background. I said, I remember this house. Our nana had a rocking chair next to the fire in the front room, and we had that big silver mirror on the staircase wall. My mother and sister just stared at me wide-eyed. I asked what's wrong. My sister couldn't speak, but my mother said, "You never really lived in that house. I was pregnant with you at the time, but you were 6 weeks old when we moved out." Yet somehow I was able to describe the entire layout of the house. These next few things I can't really put into a clear timeline, but I know it was when I was young, up until I was around 13 or 14. By then we were living in Acomb. My mother and father had separated, so it was just my mum, me and my sister, who's 8 years older, and my brother, who's 7 years older. It wasn't easy. We lived in a small, old-fashioned, strongly Catholic northern village, and we were immediately seen as outsiders because my mother is German. We lived on the breadline in a council house mixed in with some rough families. My mother always tried to do what was best, but it was tough for her to be alone with 3 kids and no family support. She had only one friend who lived 2 doors down, and I was grateful for that. She worked a lot of little jobs trying to fit them in around the kids, but being as young as I was, I didn't really understand all these difficulties. I just knew we were somehow different. Some children weren't allowed to play with me. I later learned it was because we didn't attend the local church every Sunday, so they thought I'd be a bad influence on their kids, and they told my mother that. But all I knew was my mother said not to play with them, so I didn't. Anyway, I'm digressing. When I was very young, I was always a quiet child. I loved to read and colour and would spend hours in our dining room, where my mother kept a big bookshelf full of encyclopedias and a record player. I would browse through the books and lyrics on the records, copying them all down, then do a little presentation for my mother. I'm sure she probably didn't want to sit through them, but she always humoured me. I used to have a friend called Jack, but he would only appear in our house. I'd talk to him, read the encyclopedias to him, colour my pictures and just spend time with him. But when I started school, Jack stopped visiting. Years later, my mother told me she'd sometimes see or hear me talking to someone, but she thought it was just an imaginary friend and left me be. At that time, I shared a bedroom with my sister, and sometimes saw a man in our room. He was always crying and looking out of the window. I never interacted with him, but I would tell my mother. She said she had seen him too, though I don't know if she actually did or if she was just trying to comfort me. When I asked my sister, she said she saw nothing. Later I found out a man had died in the house, a previous tenant. I don't know if the man I saw was him or something else. My brother then joined the army, so I got my own room, which I was so excited about. I must have been around 9 or 10, and that's when the strange dreams started. I say dreams, but let me explain. This didn't happen every night. At first, maybe once a week. But as I got older, it got more frequent and intense. I would go to sleep and dream of people I didn't know, in places I'd never seen. Most of the time, the people in my dreams tried to get me to go with them somewhere, but I would always refuse. It was always a fight to get back to a familiar place, which I would eventually find after sometimes being chased or hurt in some way. For example, one night I went to sleep and woke up suddenly in the train station. There was a woman on the opposite platform waving at me and calling me over. I was confused, not knowing where I was or who she was. I just wanted to get home. Then suddenly she was on my side of the platform, coming towards me. An awful feeling filled me, and I had a desperate urge to get away. She grabbed my wrist and told me I was going with her. She started pulling me and I fought back, screaming for my mother, brother, sister to help. But no one was there. We struggled and I kept shouting no. Eventually I managed to pull free and started running. I made it out onto a street with houses I'd never seen before. I couldn't see the woman behind me, but I could still feel her presence. I'd go in and out of some of the houses to hide and get away, but she always knew where I was and found me. Then I saw my house. I ran up the front steps and burst through the front door. And then I woke up. This is just one example, but over the years I had these dreams nearly every night. Eventually I trained myself to recognize what I was dreaming. In my dream I would start to limp and drag my right foot. Sometimes I'd suddenly be running somewhere in the dream, and when my right foot began dragging, I'd realize, oh, I'm dreaming, and wake myself up. When I woke, I would often feel traumatized by the dream and go to my mother's room to feel safe. She would let me sleep with her until morning. Unfortunately, even at a young age, I had witnessed violence and suffered at the hands of my father. So when I told my mother about the dreams, she thought it was a trauma response to what I'd been through. What I didn't know then, but eventually learned, was that every time I had one of these dreams, I was actually walking around the house while asleep, going from room to room, standing frozen, staring at my family members or my reflection in mirrors, or just standing by windows and doorways. As you can imagine, I was exhausted during the day, as my little body was worn out from walking and standing all night. My mother took me to the doctors, but all tests came back normal. They said it was probably a trauma response and that I would grow out of it. During this time, which probably lasted 2 to 3 years, my mother befriended an older lady named Norma. We lived in a terrace of about 8 houses, and if you walked out the back gate, there was a small hill. At the top of the hill, there was a cluster of bungalows, mostly occupied by older people. This is where Norma lived. From her kitchen window, you could see the top 2 windows of my house. Norma was like the grandmother I never met. I spent a lot of time with her and her dog. She taught me how to cross-stitch, and I would go over just to keep her company. I walked her dog sometimes, and she would cook me treats. I'd spend hours reading in her garden, which had rhubarb growing. I loved sitting there, eating rhubarb dipped in sugar from my little pot. The dream started to escalate. It wasn't just people anymore, but what I can only describe now as demons or monsters. Aggressive and demanding. I also noticed that after every one of these dreams, the loft hatch in our house was always slightly ajar. Eventually I stopped sleeping in my own room and would sleep in my sister's room instead. That didn't stop the dreams completely, but made them less frequent. Another side note, you can imagine the horror my sister and I felt years later, when we watched Paranormal Activity for the first time, and saw the girl behaving exactly like I had as a child. One day I was at Norma's, sitting in her garden reading a book and dipping rhubarb in sugar, when she came out looking very worried and told me to come inside. I'd never seen her like that before, but I obeyed. Inside, I was reading in the front room with her dog, while Norma and my mother talked in the kitchen, clearly concerned. Then they came to the front room and Norma sat in front of me and told me everything was going to be okay. She began talking about God and how he could help me. She handed me some rosary beads. My family were not, and still are not, religious in any way. But when she spoke to me that day, telling me that if I ever felt scared or alone, I should hold the beads tightly and pray to God to see me, hear me, and fill me with his love, it just made sense. My mother sat behind Norma looking worried, and I promised them both I would do as they said. From that night on, I went to bed with the rosary beads tied around my wrist. When I got scared in my dreams, I would call out to God, and my house would appear in the dream. I would walk to it and then wake up. Sometimes in the morning you could see the imprint of the beads on my palm where I'd been gripping them so tightly. After that, my mother installed locks on the loft hatch so it never opened, unless someone specifically needed to go up there, which, to my memory, never happened. Unfortunately, the dreams didn't stop completely. I still had them until I was about 20 years old, but their mood changed. They were no longer as dark and violent. I still saw people I didn't know and places I'd never been, but I was able to explore them more calmly before waking up. As a young child I was terrified, but as I got older either I learned to cope better or I became desensitized. I don't really know which. We moved out of that house the following year. I later found out that that day, when I was sat in Norma's garden, she and my mother had been in her kitchen generally chatting. She obviously knew about my issues of sleepwalking, but she looked out the window and saw a dark figure staring at me from my bedroom window. She called for my mother, who then saw the same figure, and then they called me in. Now my mother knew that no one was in the house, and Norma, being very religious, thought she would step in. That's why she gave me the beads and told me to pray. She also organised for a priest to go over and bless the house. Obviously my mother did not tell me any of this until the day of the photos I mentioned earlier. That was the main thing that happened to me as a child, but other smaller events happened also. When I was about 12 years old, a new girl moved to the village called Holly. I became friends with her and she invited me and our other friend Philippa around to her house. Her house was an old grade listed building, absolutely huge. 9 bedrooms, 5 bathrooms. A complete contrast to my humble little council house. I think it may have been one of the oldest houses in Acomb, but I don't know that for sure. We'd been playing in her garden and we were called in for tea by the housekeeper, whom I mistook for her mother. As soon as I stepped into the house, I knew something was off. I was going through my dream phase, although none of my friends knew about it, so I could feel it in the air. We then started walking down a hallway, where there were all these plaques on the walls with people's names on them. I asked what they were for, and Holly stated that these were all the people who had ever died there. She was giggling as if it was a joke, but with what I had seen in my dreams, it wasn't a joke to me. We had our tea and then went to her room. We were just being typical 12-year-old girls, and Gina G had just brought out her hit, Ooh Ah, Just a Little Bit, into the charts. We all had a hairbrush or something similar in our hands, dancing and singing along to the song. Then a little bell rang in the corner, and we heard someone shout Holly's name. It was the housekeeper stating that someone had called for Holly. So Holly said, "Back in a minute," and left the room, leaving me and Philippa still singing in her room. All of a sudden, the door slammed shut. On one of Holly's walls she had loads of VHS tapes on a shelf, and they started to fly off of the shelves. Me and my friend Philippa started screaming and made for the door, but when we got there it was locked and we couldn't open it. We were banging on the door and screaming for help. We heard Holly on the other side shouting at us to open the door, but we couldn't. What felt like an eternity but was probably only about 30 seconds passed, until we heard a click and the door swung open. We all stood there shocked, and I said to Holly I had to get home. I literally ran all the way home and didn't dare tell my mother, as she would probably not let me go back there again. When I next saw Holly, she was trying to logically explain to me that it was an old house, and her room had been fire damaged before they bought it. The door must have simply got stuck with the wind. But I knew it was something more sinister than that. Despite already having that awful experience, I stupidly went back again to play in her room. Nothing actually happened this time though, which I was glad of. What I didn't know until the next time I went over was that Holly had a tape recorder under her bed, and she had recorded us in her room the whole time. After I left, she had listened to it and played it to me on the next visit. You could hear us playing and talking, but you could also hear women talking, screaming and crying, babies crying, and what sounded like a low growling noise, amongst other things that just made no sense. It was then that Holly admitted to me that she was a kind of ghost hunter, and that she and her family loved all things paranormal. I'm not quite sure what happened next, as I was so angry at her, but I remember arguing with her when the windows in her room started to open and close on their own, and then her wardrobe doors. It was then that I thought, I'm not getting trapped in here with whatever is on that tape, and I went to run out of the bedroom door. I wanted to get home and away from this place. I was making my way downstairs when I felt two hands push on my back and push me down the stairs. Luckily I did not hurt myself. At the bottom of the stairs, now picking myself up, I remember Holly just looking shocked over the top of the stairs, and I just ran out of the house. I never went back to that house, and I never spoke to Holly again. Just after my 14th birthday we moved down to Suffolk, and to be honest I didn't have anything for a long time. I would still have the occasional dream, but nothing that ever worried or scared me to the point it had when I was younger. Until I was 16, and I got a small cleaning job. I used to work with my mother. We would clean in an old building, being used as a solicitor's office. I would get off the school bus and meet her. We would then go and clean and then make our way home. This building gave me the creeps as soon as I entered it. I had a number of incidents happen here. My personal items being moved, a chair being moved in front of me, paper clips flying off a desk towards me, bins being knocked over, doors swinging as if someone had just pushed past them, that sort of thing. My mother and I used to clean a floor each, but after all these things started happening, I asked if we could work together, doing the top floor and then the bottom floor. Obviously she agreed, and the incidents did calm down but didn't stop happening. We stopped working there shortly after this, as my mother was concerned about my welfare. After this, for the same cleaning company, we would clean a school in the summer holidays, so me and my mother went to this job. There was an older lady on the team when we all showed up for the first day. The moment I saw her, I felt like I knew her. I couldn't explain it. It was almost like I had met her before but couldn't put my finger on it. She didn't talk much to me, and it was about a week later that we were sat outside one of the mobile art classes in the hot sun eating some lunch. Just me and her. I sat having lunch when she just blurted out, "Have you ever been to a medium?" I was a little shocked but said, "No, why?" She told me that there were a lot of people around me trying to get my attention, and that I wasn't listening to them. We just sat there in silence, eating our sandwiches. I didn't know what to say, but it did make me wonder. Were the people in my dreams the people around me, trying to give me some sort of message? Is that why I never recognised any of them, always in an unfamiliar place, trying to get their unfinished business sorted so they could pass on? I really didn't know, and I still don't. She didn't really say much else to me except that if I wanted some peace, then I should start listening to them instead of running away. All I can say is, what happened to me later in life really did freak me and my husband out. My husband was a non-believer before this happened, but now he believes. I was about 30 years old when this one happened. We had met a new couple, known them for about 6 to 7 months, and they had invited us over one Friday for pizza and drinks, so we popped over. But before I get to that night, I need to rewind to the Wednesday before. I worked in community care and would work split shifts, so 7 AM to 2 PM and then 5 PM to 10 PM. I would go home on my break to shower and sometimes nap. On this occasion, I was in bed having a short nap when I had a dream, but when I woke up, I thought it had actually happened. In the dream, I was on the bed napping, exactly as I was, and my phone rang. I missed the call, but the caller left a message. When I called my voicemail, it was a woman telling me to meet her at the church nearby. I thought it was such an odd voicemail to receive, but when I went to call the number back, I woke up. Now, I was so sure this had actually happened, I immediately checked my phone log, because I was sure I would see that I had a missed call from a random number, and would see my call to the voicemail, but neither call was logged. I was so confused. I was so sure it had happened. Anyways, I put it down to me being tired. I mentioned it to my husband the next day when I saw him, and he agreed I was working a lot of hours. Thursday night, I had a dream about this woman, and she was asking me to help her get to church. Something clicked inside me and I knew I had to help her. We went to this church in my local area. I have never even been to this church in real life, and I even went there after all this to check if it actually looked the same, and it did. And we watched a young girl get married. The woman seemed so happy, and then she just left, and I woke up. Fast forward to the Friday. We arrive at our friend's house and they are outside in the garden smoking a cigarette. They lived in a 2-bed bungalow, with one of the bedrooms being at the front end of the bungalow opposite the front room. This was like a storage room, and it's where their cats spent the majority of their time, as they were house cats. They also had a dog. When we arrived, I could sense they were agitated. Something was up. I asked if everything was okay, and they said something was wrong with their cats. They came out of their room on Wednesday afternoon and have refused to go back in. I asked if they put something in there that had scared them, and they didn't know. All they knew was when they got back from work on Wednesday, all 3 cats were out of the room and wouldn't go back in. They also said they heard banging coming from inside, like someone banging on the walls. So I went in, and as soon as I stepped into the hallway, it felt as if there was something standing in the doorway to that room, just staring at me. It was almost as if I could feel its eyes on me. We walked past the doorway and I was feeling so uneasy, and we were in the front room, which is opposite. We start talking about our week, and my friend said it had been a rough week as it was her mum's birthday, just gone, and she had died last year. I was aware of her mother passing, but not that it was her birthday. Anyways, we're chatting away and I tell her of my odd experiences throughout the week. I'm explaining about the woman, and she is asking what she looks like. I tell her, and a look comes across her face. She quickly gets up and starts going through some paperwork. When she turns around, she holds up a photo and asks, "Is this the woman?" I couldn't believe my eyes. It was her, the woman who wanted to go to church. It was her dead mother, and Wednesday was her birthday. As soon as she held the photo up, the room went freezing cold. The cats and dogs all started to howl and bark in the hallway. and then we heard 3 massive bangs on the wall. We all just stood there not knowing what to do. The room returned back to its normal temperature, and the couple managed to calm down their cats and dog. Then the cat suddenly just walked back into the room, as if nothing had happened. We were all a little shaken up, but after talking with my friend, it turned out that she had fallen out with her mother just before her death, and after her death she had fallen out with the rest of her family. I still didn't understand the church reference though, until a month later when she looked up who had been married. It turns out her little sister had got married there 2 weeks previously, so 2 weeks after my experience. Maybe it was her mother trying to make her daughters make up from the other side. I don't know. But I do know my friend had a little closure on her mother's death, even though they weren't talking at the time. She had been to her grave since and spoken to her, and she felt with what happened, she knows her mother hurt her. I have thought a lot about my dreams over the years, and have tried to make some logical explanation for it all, but I'm at a loss. I still do have dreams now with strangers and strange places, but maybe because I'm no longer mentally vulnerable, I'm able to deal with it all a lot better. I have a good, happy life, and have managed to deal with my childhood trauma, so I don't know if that makes a difference. I've read some studies on how I could have been attracting this type of paranormal activity when it was at its strongest. I was going through a particularly rough time, and felt very alone. That's all for tonight, I'm afraid, my friends. Thank you to everyone who submitted their stories. I know it can be very scary putting yourself out there like that, so it's much appreciated. And I'm sorry that it has taken me so long to get back to you all. These stories don't come from professional writers. They are just normal people attempting to tell their stories as well as they can, which can be tricky when what you're talking about doesn't really make a lot of sense. Don't forget, if you've enjoyed this episode, click subscribe so you don't miss out. If you're on YouTube, then please click like, and if you're listening to the podcast, please do leave me a rating. Both of these things are a really easy way to support the show. And please do let me know any thoughts and theories you may have on these stories in the comments below. So now there's nothing left to do but thank all our wonderful Patreon supporters who keep the show running. Our tape library archivist Umiko Grimm, West Virginia Vegetable Man, Tina S, Thomas Boatwright, Crimson DM, Detective, Stephen Lutman, Sean Miller, Sandy Lusk, Sag El Kali, Sarah Boyd, Restock 1731, Quirky Joseph, Pixelina, Monty Montes, Mirashard, Midi Azabine, Emmy Bartley, Lady Bet Noir, Juno, Judith Hacker, Joseph Condola, Jolly Jedi, Joe, Gina Britton, G-Raw, Gabrielle, Emily Carlin, Eric Salas, Dagon Adorleg, Dominic DeAngelis, Dawn Swan, Darla, Crystal Edwards, Ashlar's Books, Alfredo Sandoval and Adeline. Our lead archivist Xavier Rangel, Van Yell, Tyler Michael, Tracy Torello, The Original Deer, Ridiculous, Old Soul Like Mine, Plague Doctor is in, Melissa Harrison, Law William, London Grace, Creepy Candy, Brian Baker, Amy Stubblefield, Alex O'Neill, Alex Goldberg and 1000th Ghost. And our very generous Grand Overseers, the God Emperor of Mankind, Morning Rain 2619, Leah Carmella, Katie, Harrison the Ogre Lord, Bad Diddle, Agent 355 and Queen of Flatulence. As always, a huge thank you to them, all my junior archivists on Patreon, and my members on YouTube. All your contributions play a huge part in making this show what it is. And thank you to you for making it to the end of the episode. Until next time, this has been Night Drive Paranormal. Get home safe.